It's not enough to say you want to be a leader. You need to be able to say why you want to be a leader. You've got to be able to articulate the reasoning, the rationale behind why you want to be a person of influence. And the reason is because your motive matters more than just about anything else in your leadership. Welcome to the Matt Ware Show, a podcast for leaders who want more and won't settle for less. Straight talk to help you lead better, live bolder, and not lose yourself in the process. If you're serious about going to the next level in life and leadership, you're in the right place. Welcome to another episode of the Matt Ware Show, where we talk about going to the next level in life and in leadership. Glad to have you with me today as we talk about what might be one of the most important things under the surface, under the hood of your leadership, and that is your motive. What is your motive for being a leader? Some people have never even really thought about this consciously. They think leadership is just, the next step up the ladder in their career path, the natural progression for them based on their giftings or their personality or talent. They assume maybe that's just what they're supposed to do. Okay, but I want to challenge that assumption today. You should not become a leader until you know why you're becoming a leader. You should not accept or step into a role of influence or power or position until you've gotten gut level honest with yourself about why you're doing it. Because if you don't have good motives, you will not be a good leader. Back in the COVID crisis of 2020, something we saw at every level of leadership, whether it was in government or business or nonprofit or education, doesn't matter. What we saw is that crisis revealed leadership, right? And it usually does. Crisis reveals leadership, reveals good leadership, and it reveals bad leadership. Everything gets amplified in a crisis. John Maxwell says that crisis reveals players and pretenders. In a crisis, we see who the real players are, the ones on our team, the ones in our industry who've got game. And we also see who the pretenders are, the ones who might be in the game, but they don't have any game. Crisis reveals leadership. And what's interesting about that is that as I think about this idea that crisis reveals leaders, it's not just that it reveals who they are, just their names, right? Like we know so-and-so because they faced a tough situation, they took the ball and ran with it. It's not just that. Crisis doesn't just reveal who they are. It reveals who they really are. Right? I mean, their character, their heart. It reveals their motive. And that's what I want to talk about today, the motive of a leader. And it may be that crisis reveals it in a more clear, more telling, more sort of undeniable way than any other time in a leader's life. But I think if we really take our leadership seriously, we will not wait for a crisis for that to be revealed. We won't wait for a crisis to know what we're really made of. Motive is something only you can really know about yourself. Nobody else can fully or accurately assess your motives. No one can fully see or fully judge what your motives are. This is the deep work that you as a leader have to do for yourself. You have to know what drives you. You have to know what motivates you. Why are you really doing what you're doing? Why are you really in the position you're in? Your motive matters in your leadership. Why you do what you do matters. Years ago, I read a great book by Patrick Lencioni called The Motive. Got it here. It usually sits actually on the little bookshelf behind me, but I pulled it off for this episode. Maybe you're familiar with him. If you're in this space, he's written dozens of books about leadership and organizational health, really kind of pioneered the organizational health movement with books like, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team or Ideal Team Player, The Advantage, things like that. But he says, and I've heard him say this multiple times in different, interviews or whatever, he actually says that of all the books he's written, this one called The Motive is the most important one. Because what it does is it lays the foundation for everything else really that he's written about. He said, from a chronological perspective, this should be the first book, in his library, his catalog of work. The Motive is the first one because it's the foundation. And I think that's something to pay attention to because, here's this guy who is widely recognized as the guru on organizational health. speaks on the biggest stages in the world, consults Fortune 500 companies, New York Times best-selling author to the tune of 10 million copies. And he's saying this is his most important book. This is the most important message that he has to convey. And what that communicates is that our motive really is the foundation for everything else we do in leadership. Nothing else you do as a leader will matter if your motive isn't right. You can have great skill sets, great vision, be great with people, have great strategic thinking, great resource allocation. None of it matters if you have bad motives. Bad motives will ruin everything in your leadership. Okay, and if you don't believe that, if you think motive really isn't all that important, it's just internal, nobody sees it, it's just personal, whatever, let me prove to you why motive matters as a leader. And I can do that very quickly with a history lesson that highlights someone who had incredible leadership skill, but horrible leadership motive, and his name is Adolf Hitler. And some people don't like to think about this, they don't like to acknowledge this, but I think it's highly instructive for us to recognize this. Hitler was actually an incredible leader if all you're looking for is leadership skill. He had charisma, vision, strategy, masterful communicator, knew how to allocate resources to get the job done and to see the mission accomplished. The problem is that leadership is not just about skill, it's about motive. Hitler had incredible skill and had horrible motive. And this underscores the principle that nothing else matters if you have wrong motives in your leadership. The world needs leaders, now more than ever. But the world will not be a better place if you want to be a leader for all the wrong reasons. Now that begs the question, what are the right reasons? And what are the wrong reasons? If you were to sit down and list out all your motivations for why you're leading or why you want to be leading, it could be a long list. And it could be, kind of a murky, muddy, confusing list. Okay, you may want to lead because you're naturally gifted. Maybe because you like to take on a challenge. Maybe people have just always looked to you to take charge. Maybe you want to climb the corporate ladder. Maybe something in you feels unfulfilled until you're at the top of the food chain. Maybe you're trying to grow your net worth. Maybe you do have a sense of this greater, calling or purpose for your life. All kinds of different reasons and motivations, all kinds of different motives for why we do this, for why we pursue leadership. But in this book, Lencioni, I think, brilliantly breaks down this and makes it very simple. He says there's really only two core motivations for being a leader. Okay, whatever list you might have written down to try to explain to yourself or to other people why you're doing what you're doing, he says there are really only two. The two core motivations for being a leader are reward and responsibility. Reward and responsibility. Reward motivation is about what I get for being a leader, and responsibility motivation is about what I give by being a leader. Reward asks, what's in it for me? And responsibility asks, how can I serve others? Reward is ultimately selfish, but responsibility is ultimately selfless. Reward sees leadership as a perk, but responsibility sees leadership as a privilege. Reward is about what I deserve, and responsibility is about what I steward. Reward says, I've earned this, and responsibility says, I'm entrusted with this. Do you lead from a posture of reward, or do you lead from a posture of responsibility? I do talk a lot about the idea of leaders taking care of themselves, both on the podcast and in direct conversations with leaders who I coach and consult with. It's so important for a leader to learn how to take care of themselves, because if you don't take care of yourself, you won't lead well and you won't lead long. But the other side of that is that if you're a leader, you're not in it for yourself. You're in it for others. Good leadership is bad personal economics. If you're doing leadership right, you will always give more than you get. Leadership doesn't just require sacrifice, it is sacrifice. And as the leader, you will sacrifice first and you will sacrifice most. Leaders start earlier, end later, eat last, and skip all the perks. And it's so interesting to me that some people try to ascend into leadership roles or take leadership opportunities thinking that somehow it's going to make their lives better or easier. Because in my experience, the opposite is the case. Leaders will usually work more hours than their team. They'll sacrifice personal and family time to make sure that something gets accomplished. They're more likely to forego their vacation time or their pay raise or their bonus so that someone else on the team can get it. In the first few weeks and months of the COVID crisis, I was leading a large church, and like many organizations, of different shapes and sizes, a lot of us, we were preparing mentally and emotionally in the event that we might need to make some tough decisions with our team. Maybe we would have to do a pay cut or furlough some of them or whatever. And during that time, I had several people on my leadership team come to me privately and say, hey, if you need to do something, if you need to make a decision, if you need to make a pay cut, you can start with me. And of course, what they didn't know is that I had already made the decision that if we had to do that, it was going to start with me, right? And so I guess we would have had to arm wrestle over who would take the first pay cut or the biggest pay cut. And really, I've never been more proud of my team when they expressed that, because it showed me they were leading with the right motive. Listen to me, if you got into leadership for the money, for the power, for the title, for the prestige, you are in it for the wrong reason. You have the wrong motivation, period. And yes, some of those things are going to come with the territory. Some of those things are the trappings of leadership as you grow. And that does sometimes happen, but that should not be the motivation for why you're a leader. Are you a leader because you have achieved the reward? Or are you a leader because you have accepted the responsibility? There's a huge difference. See, real leadership has weight to it, has gravity to it. Real leadership might be a cause for concern more than a sense of accomplishment when you realize it's not about reward, it's about responsibility. Do you want to be a leader, or do you actually want to do what leaders do? Being a leader is one thing. Having the title, having your name on the org chart or on the corner office, that's one thing. But doing what leaders do is another thing entirely. A lot of people want the rewards of leadership. Not a lot of people want the responsibilities of leadership. Let me give you an example of how this might play out. Think about the NFL draft, right? That 21, 22-year-old college athlete that gets drafted to play pro ball. Probably something he's been thinking about since he was a kid, right? He's worked hard for the last 15 years, worked his way up through, Little League and high school, and got a scholarship to play D1 ball, and finally gets drafted by a pro team. Okay, and he's at the press conference. He's wearing a jersey with his name on the back. And his attitude in that moment tells you everything about whether this is a reward or a responsibility. If he sees it as a reward, right? This is something he's worked his whole life for. He's earned it. He's entitled to it. He's finally arrived. He's going to celebrate like crazy. He's going to take the signing bonus, buy the fancy car, the swanky clothes, go out partying. Why? Because he is an NFL player now. But if he sees it as a responsibility, of course he's going to be happy that he got signed. But the first thing he's going to do is get his butt to the gym, right? Because he's got to get in even better shape because he's going to another level of competition. He's got to start poring over the playbook to learn the offense of that team that drafted him. He's going to hire a trainer. He's going to get with his position coach. Okay, that's the difference between someone who wants to be an NFL player versus someone who wants to do what NFL players do. It's the difference between thinking that the draft is the end of your journey or thinking that it's the beginning of your journey. Okay, that's the difference between seeing it as a reward versus a responsibility. And in the same way, I think we've got to ask ourselves, do we want to be leaders, or are we willing to? Do we really want to do what leaders do? Do we believe that a leader means that being a leader means we've arrived? Or do we believe that it means we're just getting started? Is this our reward or is it our responsibility? What is our motive? And let me just say this too, because I think it's important. We don't just check our motive. We have to watch our motive all along the way. You could start with the right motive, but end with the wrong one. You can start selfless, but drift toward being selfish. Human nature tends to push us towards selfishness in our leadership. If you serve, you're likely to find success. And if you find success, you're likely to become selfish. So you have to constantly evaluate, what is my motive? Am I doing this because I've achieved the reward? Or am I doing this because I've accepted the responsibility? Nothing else will matter if you don't have the right motive. It's interesting when I think about this topic. A while back, I heard Alex Hormozy talk about this. If you know him at all, if you follow him, you know, this is a hard charger, no nonsense, ultra elite level business guru, right? And Alex Hormozy said that this book by Patrick Lencioni, this concept of really getting gut level with yourself about your motive in business and in life and in leadership, Hormozy said this completely and totally changed everything for him. He got ruthlessly honest about the fact that he actually had been in it for himself. He had been all about the perks and the rewards. He had the wrong motivation. And he said that coming to terms with this and making these changes is really what transformed his leadership. And so I want to just put that out there because I think that's a pretty powerful endorsement. And I'll also just say, I think this is something good leaders have to become very aware of and very attuned to make sure that we don't just have good motives, but that we keep good motives all the way through our leadership journey, right? Because if we don't have the right motives, nothing else really matters. If this helped you, would you share it with somebody else? And don't just tag somebody who you think has bad motives, right? That's not going to go well. So share it with somebody who think, man, they're going to be challenged by it. They're going to grow. They're going to be encouraged by it. That helps us get the word out to more people. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop a comment, or if you're watching on YouTube, or shoot me a DM at the Matt Ware on all the socials is where you can find me. But do this week. Do a gut check and ask yourself if you are leading from the motive of reward or the motive of responsibility. Okay, and then once you know, make the changes you need to make, if you need to make them, or in the areas that you need to make them, to the degree that you need to make them, so that you really can do what we always say on this show, which is go lead better and go live bolder.